Min Kong the Viet, Bam Sat outline moi, Vi Trong Kuok Tro Trien Hien Tai Kong Ko outline moi Hok Tu de Dua Veo. Nu Min Tu Tao Noi Dung Tse Kong Dung Voi U Ka Bam Sat Qua Ban. He Goe outline moi, Hoket Not La Tu de Nu outline de Duok Zak Din O Kuok Tro Trien Truok. Sao Du Min Se Tra Dung Din Dang Ban U Ka, Koang 602. Tone Bo Trong Mot Block Due Not Nam Trong Mot Cap. Mo Dao Bang Mot Ka Tao Tama, Jiao Cam Suk. Ban Sat Van Fong, Nip Kuva Ka Truck De Thiat Lap. Kong Hoi Them, Chi Tra Noi Dung Part 1. I've seen enough courtrooms to know that silence can be louder than a scream, but on that gray morning, the silence inside the Richmond District Courthouse carried something darker. It carried expectation. The kind that settles over a room when people have already decided who deserves respect and who deserves humiliation before a single word is spoken. Officer Marcus Dale stood near the courtroom entrance with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his badge answered every question. His polished boots reflected the fluorescent lights above while his fingers drummed lazily against the leather belt around his waist. Every employee who passed offered him a nod, some out of respect, others out of habit. Either way, Marcus accepted it as confirmation that this building belonged to people like him. Across the hallway, a woman quietly approached the security checkpoint carrying nothing more than a slim leather briefcase and a stack of neatly organized documents. She wore a charcoal gray suit that blended into the crowd rather than standing above it. Her natural curls were tied back, her expression calm, almost unreadable. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Her name was Olivia Hayes. No one noticed that she briefly studied every security camera before stepping forward. No one noticed how her eyes lingered for less than a second on the courtroom doors, the evidence clerk's office, and the hallway leading toward the judge's chambers. To everyone else, she looked like another attorney, another witness, another woman trying to survive another exhausting day inside the justice system. Marcus saw something entirely different. There she is again, he muttered to another officer beside him. Officer Brian Keller followed Marcus's gaze before shrugging. You know her? Marcus smirked. Don't need to. He watched Olivia present her identification to the court officer with steady hands. Before the officer could even finish checking the credentials, Marcus walked over, his heavy footsteps echoing across the marble floor. Hold on. The room grew slightly quieter. Marcus reached out and took the identification card without asking permission. Olivia looked directly into his eyes. Is there a problem, officer? Her voice remained remarkably composed. Marcus barely glanced at the card before chuckling. You people always seem to find your way into places you don't belong. Several nearby officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Nobody interrupted. Olivia calmly extended her hand. I'll need that back. Marcus ignored the request. Instead, he slowly examined her from head to toe as though searching for evidence that justified the suspicion already fixed inside his mind. Funny, he said. You don't exactly look like federal counsel. What exactly does federal counsel look like? Marcus laughed. I'll know it when I see it. A faint smile almost appeared on Olivia's face. Almost. She folded her hands in front of her and waited. Behind them, attorneys continued walking through the hallway. Clerks carried stacks of files. Reporters prepared notebooks for the hearing that would begin within minutes. Life continued. Yet an invisible tension spread through the corridor. Brian leaned toward Marcus. Maybe just give her the ID back. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he flipped the credential over again before casually slipping it into his own pocket. If it's real, he said, you can collect it after security clears you. Olivia's eyes followed the motion, but her expression never changed. I'd advise against that. Marcus stepped closer until only inches separated them. Or what? She answered quietly enough that only he could hear. Because every decision you make from this moment forward is being remembered. Marcus rolled his eyes. Is that supposed to scare me? No. A long pause followed. It's simply the truth. For reasons Marcus couldn't explain, those words lingered longer than they should have. But arrogance has a way of drowning out instinct. He gestured toward the metal detector. Search her briefcase. The security officer hesitated. Olivia slowly placed the leather case onto the inspection table without resistance. Inside were nothing more than legal files, handwritten notes, a fountain pen, and an ordinary black notebook. Ordinary. At least, that's what everyone believed. None of them knew that hidden among those papers were documents capable of destroying careers, exposing years of corruption, and transforming this courthouse from a symbol of unquestioned authority into the very crime scene it had unknowingly protected for far too long. The X-ray machine hummed softly as Olivia's briefcase disappeared beneath the black rubber curtain. For a brief moment, every conversation in the hallway seemed to fade into the background. Even the courthouse clock, ticking somewhere above the marble corridor, felt unnaturally loud. The security officer studied the monitor with practiced indifference. Nothing unusual, he finally muttered. Marcus frowned. Run it again. The officer hesitated but obeyed. Again the same image appeared, documents, a notebook, a fountain pen, reading glasses, and several sealed legal folders. Nothing remotely suspicious. Marcus folded his arms. Open it. Olivia met his eyes without raising her voice. Those files are protected. Not anymore. The security officer slowly unlatched the briefcase while several attorneys passing through the checkpoint slowed their pace. Curiosity spread faster than conversation. Within seconds, half a dozen people were quietly watching. Marcus flipped through the folders with exaggerated confidence. Contracts. Court filings. Evidence indexes. Financial records. Every document appeared perfectly ordinary. He looked disappointed. You wasted my time. Olivia answered calmly. No, officer. You're wasting your own. That sentence lingered in the air longer than either of them expected. Marcus slammed the final folder shut. You sure like making threats. I haven't threatened you once. Then. What do you call this? The truth. Brian Keller shifted uneasily beside Marcus. Maybe we should let her through. Marcus ignored him completely. Instead, he reached into the briefcase one final time and removed a slim black notebook that looked older than everything else inside. No labels, he said. No title. He turned it over in his hand. What's this? Olivia's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. You should put that back. Marcus smiled. So this matters. He opened the notebook. The first several pages were blank. Then came a series of handwritten dates. Names. Badge numbers. Case references. Some were crossed out with precise black lines. Others carried small red circles beside them. Marcus recognized one immediately. His own. His smile disappeared almost instantly. He quickly flipped another page. Internal complaint numbers. Witness initials. Transfer records. Photographs clipped beneath transparent sleeves. Nothing was explained, yet every page suggested pieces of a puzzle someone had been assembling for years. What exactly is this? Olivia answered with complete composure. A journal. Marcus laughed, though it sounded forced. A journal? My observations. He looked directly at one page again. His badge number appeared twice. Below it sat a single handwritten sentence. Pattern consistent. Marcus snapped the notebook closed. You've been spying on police officers. I've been documenting facts. The distinction irritated him even more. Around them, several courthouse employees exchanged uncertain glances. No one stepped forward. No one defended either side. The hallway had become a silent audience. Marcus slipped the notebook beneath his arm. "I'm confiscating this. You don't have the authority." "I decide what authority I have." Olivia inhaled slowly before speaking. "No. You've mistaken temporary power for permanent control." Marcus leaned closer. "And you've mistaken patience for weakness." For the first time, Olivia allowed herself the smallest smile. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" She glanced briefly toward the security camera mounted above the entrance. "It means today's report just became much longer." Marcus instinctively followed her gaze. Only then did he notice the tiny blinking red light. Recording. Every word. Every gesture. Every decision. For reasons he couldn't explain, a faint chill crept across the back of his neck. It lasted only a second. Then arrogance returned, pushing caution aside. He tucked the notebook under his arm and pointed toward the courtroom doors. "You're staying right here until I decide otherwise." Olivia simply nodded. "Take all the time you need." Her calmness unsettled him far more than anger ever could. Because deep down, beneath the confidence, beneath the badge, beneath years of believing he controlled every room he entered, Marcus felt something unfamiliar beginning to surface. The uncomfortable possibility that he had just interrupted someone who had expected every one of his moves long before he ever made them. The hallway no longer felt like a public corridor. It felt like a stage where every witness had forgotten they were part of the performance until it was too late. Marcus held the black notebook tightly beneath his arm, refusing to admit that its contents had unsettled him. He had read only a handful of pages, yet each one carried details no ordinary citizen should have known. Dates matched disciplinary reports. Complaint numbers matched internal files. Even the sequence of incidents mirrored events that had never appeared in the local news. Coincidence, he told himself. Nothing more. He turned toward Brian. "Take her to interview room 3. Brian blinked. "For what?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "I'm not finished with her." Olivia didn't resist as they escorted her down a narrow hallway lined with faded photographs of retired judges and decorated officers. The portrait seemed to watch in silence while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Inside interview room 3, the walls were bare except for a clock that ticked with relentless precision. A single metal table stood beneath the ceiling camera. Olivia sat without being asked. She folded her hands together and quietly observed the room. Marcus remained standing. "I've changed my mind," he said. "About what?" "I don't think you're just an attorney." "I never said I was." His jaw tightened. "Then who are you?" Olivia tilted her head slightly. "Does the answer matter?" "It matters to me." "No." She spoke so gently that the refusal sounded almost sympathetic. "It only matters whether you're willing to face the consequences of your choices." Marcus laughed sharply. "You keep talking like a philosopher." "I talk like someone who's watched the same mistake happen over and over." Brian leaned against the wall, clearly uncomfortable. "Marcus, maybe call legal before we keep going." Marcus ignored him. He placed the notebook on the table. "You've collected information on officers. I've collected evidence. You don't have authorization." Olivia looked directly toward the camera above them. Neither did many of the people in those files. The room fell silent. Marcus noticed she had glanced at the camera 3 separate times since entering. Not nervously. Deliberately. As though she wanted someone else to hear every word. He followed her gaze. The recording light remained steady. For the first time that morning, he wondered who else might eventually watch the footage. His phone vibrated. He glanced down. Courthouse administration. He rejected the call without answering. A second later, it rang again. This time the display showed the chief clerk's office. Marcus silenced it. Olivia noticed. They seem persistent. They can wait. Some things can't. Marcus pushed the notebook closer. Tell me why my badge number is in here. She remained silent. I asked you a question. And I chose not to answer. You don't get to choose. A faint smile crossed her face. Everyone gets to choose. Another vibration interrupted him. Then another. Brian finally spoke. Marcus, you've had 4 calls in less than 2 minutes. I said ignore them. Before anyone could continue, the interview room door opened without warning. A courthouse administrator stepped inside, breathing heavily after hurrying through the building. Officer Dale. Marcus frowned. We're busy. I know. The administrator swallowed. But Administrative Judge Eleanor Brooks has delayed this morning's hearing. Marcus looked confused. So? She's asking for the woman you detained. The room became perfectly still. Marcus glanced toward Olivia, expecting surprise. Instead, she simply closed her eyes for a brief second, as though she had anticipated this interruption all along. And, the administrator added carefully, she said to bring the notebook with you. Marcus's confidence didn't disappear all at once. It cracked. Just enough for doubt to slip inside. Marcus walked behind the courthouse administrator without saying a word, the black notebook still clutched in his hand. Every step echoed across the polished marble floor, but the confidence that had accompanied him earlier was fading beneath a growing sense of uncertainty. He had expected a routine confrontation. Instead, the morning was slipping beyond his control. Olivia followed quietly beside Brian Keller. She never asked where they were going. She already knew. The corridor leading toward administrative court was noticeably different from the public hallways. The noise of attorneys and reporters faded behind thick oak doors. Here, conversations were softer. Security was tighter. Every employee seemed to recognize that decisions made on this floor carried consequences reaching far beyond a single courtroom. As they approached the chamber entrance, 2 deputy marshals immediately stepped aside. Not for Marcus. For Olivia. The gesture lasted only a second. Marcus noticed it anyway. He frowned. You know them? Olivia answered simply. They know their jobs. The administrator opened the heavy wooden doors. Inside, Administrative Judge Eleanor Brooks stood beside a long conference table covered with legal files. Several senior court officials were already present, their conversation stopping the moment Olivia entered. Judge Brooks looked directly at her. Ms. Hayes. Olivia nodded respectfully. Judge. No introduction. No explanation. Just quiet recognition between 2 people who clearly knew one another. Marcus suddenly felt like the outsider. Judge Brooks turned toward him. Officer Dale. He straightened instinctively. Yes, Your Honor. I understand you've detained Ms. Hayes. Yes, ma'am. For what reason? Marcus hesitated. Suspicious behavior. Judge Brooks waited. And I believed additional questioning was necessary. The judge extended her hand. The notebook. Marcus reluctantly handed it over. She opened it carefully, scanning only a single page before closing it again. Her expression hardened. Did you read this? A few pages. Did you remove it from Miss Hayes without a warrant? Marcus shifted his weight. I considered it evidence. Judge Brooks looked at him for several silent seconds. Then she spoke with measured precision. No. It was protected material. Marcus glanced toward Olivia. She remained perfectly calm, offering neither satisfaction nor anger. Only patience. Judge Brooks continued. Officer Dale, do you know why Ms. Hayes was scheduled to appear in this courthouse today? Marcus answered honestly. No. The judge folded her hands. She was invited. Another uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Marcus felt dozens of eyes resting on him. Invited? Nothing about this morning fit the assumptions he had made. The administrator quietly placed another folder before the judge. She opened it and removed a formal letter bearing multiple official seals. Without handing it over, she looked back at Marcus. You assumed identity before verifying authority. You assumed intent before reviewing facts. And you exercised power before understanding jurisdiction. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. Brian lowered his eyes. Marcus searched for a response that never came. Finally, he managed to ask the only question left. Who, exactly is she? Judge Brooks looked toward Olivia before answering. I believe that information should come from Ms. Hayes herself. The room became perfectly still. Olivia stepped forward, placing both hands lightly on the conference table. She looked directly at Marcus, not with triumph, not with resentment, but with the quiet composure of someone who had witnessed this moment unfolding long before anyone else realized it existed. You've spent the entire morning trying to discover who I am, she said softly. Then she paused. The truth is, you were never the person I came here to investigate. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Because for the first time that day, he understood one terrifying possibility. He had mistaken himself for the investigator. When, from the very beginning, he had been the subject of the investigation. No one spoke after Olivia's final sentence. The silence itself became evidence. Marcus stood motionless, staring at the woman he had dismissed less than an hour earlier. Every assumption he had made, that she was out of place, that she needed to be questioned, that his badge placed him beyond scrutiny, was beginning to collapse under its own weight. Judge Eleanor Brooks broke the silence. Please have a seat, Officer Dale. It wasn't a request. Marcus slowly lowered himself into the chair across the conference table. For the first time in years, he felt as though the uniform on his shoulders weighed far more than it ever had. Judge Brooks opened the sealed folder that had been resting beside her. 3 months ago, she began, this court authorized an independent review concerning allegations of selective enforcement, procedural misconduct, and repeated violations of civil rights involving several law enforcement agencies. Marcus listened without interrupting. The review required investigators who could enter public institutions without announcing their authority. She looked toward Olivia. Ms. Hayes accepted that responsibility. Marcus turned. So, your internal affairs? Olivia gently shook her head. No. Department of Justice? Again, she shook her head. Not exactly. She slid a leather credential across the table. Marcus hesitated before picking it up. His heartbeat quickened. Across the top appeared the seal of the United States Department of Justice. Beneath it was another designation. Office of the Independent Special Counsel. His eyes stopped on the authorization level. Federal Oversight Division. He looked back at Olivia. You've been investigating us. I've been investigating conduct. Mine. Among others. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. Judge Brooks continued. This investigation has involved dozens of interviews, hundreds of hours of body camera footage, court recordings, dispatch logs, and civilian testimony. Olivia folded her hands. This morning was never intended to be a test. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? You created one. Every word landed with calm precision. I arrived carrying a valid appointment. I presented lawful identification. I complied with every instruction. She paused. Everything that followed came entirely from your own decisions. Marcus replayed the morning in his mind. No resistance. No raised voice. No provocation. Every escalation had begun with him. Brian Keller quietly exhaled. He had seen it too. Judge Brooks reached for a remote control resting on the conference table. She pressed a single button. A large monitor on the wall illuminated. Security footage filled the screen. Marcus watched himself approach Olivia at the security checkpoint. He heard his own voice. He watched himself take her identification. He watched himself ignore repeated opportunities to de-escalate. The room remained silent while the recording continued. No commentary was necessary. The video spoke for itself. When the footage ended, Judge Brooks switched off the monitor. "The camera doesn't record assumptions," she said quietly. "It records choices." Marcus lowered his eyes. For the first time since joining the department, he had no explanation ready. Only regret. Olivia finally stood. "I've spent years interviewing officers across this country." She looked at Marcus with neither hatred nor satisfaction. "Most people believe corruption begins with enormous crimes." She slowly shook her head. "It rarely does. It begins with small moments when someone convinces themselves that power excuses behavior they would never accept from anyone else." Marcus remained silent. Because deep inside, he realized she wasn't describing an investigation anymore. She was describing him. And the hardest part wasn't discovering that someone had been watching. It was realizing that, for the first time in his career, he had been forced to watch himself. The conference room remained quiet long after the monitor went dark. No one rushed to fill the silence because everyone understood that some truths required time to settle. Outside the tall windows, afternoon sunlight stretched across the courthouse steps, while inside, the atmosphere felt heavier than before, not with anger, but with accountability. Judge Brooks closed the investigation file. "Officer Dale," she said evenly, "this meeting is no longer about what happened this morning." Marcus slowly looked up. "It's about whether you understand why it happened." He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. For the first time in years, every prepared explanation sounded hollow before it reached his lips. Olivia remained standing near the window, watching pedestrians move through the plaza below. They had no idea that inside this room, careers, reputations, and perhaps even futures were quietly shifting direction. Without turning around, she spoke. "When I began this assignment, I expected resistance." She paused. "I expected denial." Another pause. "What I never assume is that someone cannot change." Marcus stared at her. "You still think I can?" She finally turned to face him. "I don't know. That decision belongs to you." Her answer surprised him more than any accusation could have. He had expected condemnation. Instead, she offered responsibility. Judge Brooks slid another folder across the table. "This contains complaints involving your conduct over the past 4 years." Marcus hesitated before opening it. Some complaints had been dismissed. Others had been marked as inconclusive. Several contained statements from citizens who described feeling humiliated, ignored, or unfairly targeted. One sentence caught his attention. He read it twice. "He treated me like I was guilty before I ever spoke." Marcus closed his eyes. He suddenly remembered the woman who had written it. He remembered dismissing her concerns before hearing her explanation. He remembered believing he had been efficient. Now he saw something different. He had never truly listened. Brian Keller quietly broke the silence. "I should have stopped you this morning." Marcus looked toward his partner. Brian continued. "I knew things were escalating. I stayed quiet." Olivia nodded slightly. "Silence protects behavior. It rarely protects people." Those words settled over everyone in the room. Not as criticism. As fact. Judge Brooks stood. "The administrative review will continue." Recommendations will be submitted. Any disciplinary decisions will follow established procedures. She looked directly at Marcus. No outcome has been decided today. Marcus seemed surprised. You mean? I'm not suspended. Not today. The answer offered neither relief nor certainty. Only another opportunity. Olivia walked toward the conference table and gently picked up the black notebook that had started everything. She placed it inside her briefcase. Do you know why I write everything down? Marcus quietly shook his head. Because memory follows emotion. Evidence follows facts. She fastened the briefcase. My responsibility has never been to punish people. It's to make sure the truth survives long enough for justice to find it. Marcus watched her walk toward the door. Just before leaving, she stopped. Without looking back, she spoke one final time. A badge can open doors. It can also close hearts. The choice is made long before anyone notices. The door closed softly behind her. Marcus remained seated, staring at the empty chair she had occupied. For the first time since earning his uniform, he no longer wondered how others saw him. He wondered whether he had ever truly seen himself. And somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, life continued exactly as before. Except one officer now understood that justice does not always arrive wearing a robe. Sometimes it enters quietly, carrying nothing more than a notebook, unwavering patience, and the courage to let a person's own choices tell the entire story. The investigation did not end when Olivia Hayes walked out of the courthouse. In many ways, that quiet departure was where the real story began. 48 hours later, the Richmond Police Department assembled its command staff inside a windowless conference room. The atmosphere was noticeably different from the confident briefings officers were accustomed to attending. No casual conversations filled the room. No one checked their phones. Every person understood that the Department of Justice review had entered a new phase. Captain Raymond Foster stood at the front with a thick binder resting on the podium. We've received preliminary findings from the independent special counsel. His voice was measured. There will be individual interviews beginning tomorrow. Several officers exchanged nervous glances. Marcus remained silent. He sat near the back of the room, listening more carefully than he ever had before. Weeks earlier, he would have viewed the announcement as another bureaucratic inconvenience. Now, every word carried weight. Captain Foster continued. This review is not focused solely on misconduct. It's evaluating departmental culture. That phrase lingered in Marcus's mind. Departmental culture. He suddenly realized that Olivia had never treated him as an isolated problem. She had been examining something much larger. After the meeting, Brian caught up with Marcus outside. You holding up? Marcus gave a faint shrug. I don't know. Brian nodded. I've been thinking about everything she said. So have I. They stood quietly beside their patrol vehicles. Finally, Marcus spoke. Do you remember our first day at the academy? Brian smiled slightly. We wanted to help people. Marcus looked toward the city skyline. I don't know exactly when I stopped seeing individuals. And started seeing assumptions. Brian didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned to the neighborhood where one of the old civilian complaints had originated. He parked his cruiser across the street from a small grocery store. For several minutes, he remained inside the vehicle, staring through the windshield. The complaint had seemed insignificant years earlier. Now he remembered every detail. The frightened teenager. The embarrassed mother. The unnecessary search. The words he wished he had never spoken. He stepped out of the cruiser. The grocery owner recognized him immediately. For a brief second, tension crossed the man's face. Marcus understood why. I came to apologize. The owner looked surprised. For what? For believing I already knew who you were. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Simply honest. The man slowly folded his arms. You know. I waited a long time to hear that. Marcus lowered his eyes. I know. No dramatic music played. No crowd gathered to applaud. Forgiveness did not arrive instantly. Some wounds never heal that quickly. But something else happened instead. The conversation began. Across town, Olivia reviewed another stack of investigation files in her temporary office. An assistant entered carrying fresh reports. You were right about Officer Dale. Olivia looked up. In what way? He requested voluntary bias training before any recommendation was issued. Olivia remained thoughtful for a moment before closing the file. Good. The assistant seemed surprised. That's all. Olivia smiled gently. The goal was never to destroy careers. It was to interrupt patterns. She looked toward the courthouse visible through the office window. Justice isn't measured by how many people fall. It's measured by how many choose to stand differently after the truth finds them. Far below, the city continued with its ordinary rhythm. Most people would never know what had unfolded inside those government buildings. They would never hear Olivia's name. They would never read the investigation files. But they might one day encounter an officer who paused before making an assumption, because one woman had quietly reminded him that character is revealed not when someone is watching, but when they believe no one ever will. People often believe justice arrives with sirens, headlines, and dramatic verdicts. They rarely notice its quietest victory, the moment someone chooses to become a different person when no one is forcing them to. 6 months passed. Autumn settled over Richmond, painting courthouse trees in shades of amber and crimson. The investigation had concluded weeks earlier. Several policy recommendations had been adopted. Mandatory constitutional policing workshops became standard throughout the department. Supervisors introduced new review procedures, and every complaint now received independent oversight before dismissal. The headlines lasted only a few days. The changes remained. Officer Marcus Dale still wore the same uniform. The same badge rested above his heart. But the man wearing it was no longer the one who had stood at the courthouse security checkpoint that spring morning. One chilly afternoon, Marcus responded to a routine call outside a neighborhood pharmacy. An elderly black man stood beside the entrance, visibly frustrated after a store employee mistakenly accused him of attempting to leave without paying. Months earlier, Marcus might have arrived expecting confrontation. Instead, he walked over slowly. "My name is Officer Dale," he said calmly. "I'm here to understand what happened." The old man looked surprised. "You want to hear my side first?" Marcus nodded. "That's exactly where I'd like to begin." The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. A simple misunderstanding. A misplaced receipt. No crime. No arrest. No humiliation. Before leaving, the elderly man extended his hand. "Thank you for listening." Marcus shook it quietly. "No. Thank you for giving me the opportunity." As his patrol car disappeared down the street, the pharmacy manager watched in silence. He had expected authority. Instead, he had witnessed professionalism. Across the city, Olivia Hayes prepared to conclude another assignment. Her office was nearly empty. Most investigation files had already been archived. Only one folder remained on her desk. The cover read, "Richmond Independent Review." She opened it one final time. Inside rested the first photograph taken from the courthouse surveillance system, the moment Marcus had reached for her identification card. Beneath it rested another photograph. Taken months later. Marcus speaking respectfully with neighborhood residents during a community outreach event. The contrast required no explanation. Her assistant entered carrying a sealed envelope. The final compliance report. Olivia signed the last page before carefully closing the file. So that's it? The assistant asked. Olivia smiled softly. No. It's never the end. What is it, then? She looked out the window as afternoon sunlight settled across the city. It's proof. Proof of what? That accountability and dignity don't have to be enemies. She placed the Richmond file into the archive box. Sometimes accountability becomes the bridge that allows dignity to return. Later. That evening, Marcus received an envelope delivered through departmental mail. Inside was a single handwritten note. No signature. No official seal. Only one sentence. The strongest badge is the one worn by your conscience. Marcus read it twice before folding the paper and placing it inside his wallet. Years from now, promotions would come and go. Assignments would change. New officers would join the department. Most people would never remember the morning he mistook prejudice for authority. But Marcus would. Not because it destroyed his career. Because it rebuilt his character. And somewhere beyond titles, uniforms, courtrooms, and investigations, the quiet echo of that ordinary day continued to remind everyone willing to listen that power may command obedience, but only integrity earns trust. Because in the end, the law is strongest not when it stands above the people, but when it stands beside them.